photograph doesn't exist. I looked. What should exist is this: an F-86 Sabre touching down at Suwon Air Base in May 1953, bomb shackles still mounted under the wings, and somewhere on the fuselage, fresh, probably still being stenciled by the ground crew, a red star, the kill mark. Because James Hagerstrom had just done something the aerodynamics said shouldn't work. Fighter bombers weren't supposed to dogfight. The ordnance load made them too slow, too heavy, too committed to the ground target to survive a turning engagement with a clean interceptor. Soviet advisors in Manchuria knew this. They'd done the math. An F-86 carrying 500-pounders drops from around 0.92 thrust to weight, down to maybe 0.74. The MiG-15 sits at 0.91 clean. In a dive, in a climb, in any vertical maneuver, the American jet bleeds energy faster. Should be easy meat. Hagerstrom landed with the shackles empty but still attached. He dropped the bombs on the target, some supply depot, the mission brief designated, I never found which one specifically, and then stayed in MiG Alley. Didn't run for the deck, didn't egress south like doctrine said. He saw MiGs crossing from Antung and went after them. One MiG-15 went down, confirmed by wingmen, by radio intercept, by the gun camera footage that someone at 5th Air Force reviewed and stamped. Then Hagerstrom flew home with hardware still hanging off his jet that added drag, added weight, added every disadvantage that should have gotten him killed. The absence of that photograph bothers me more than it should. We have pictures of Jabara's Sabre. We have McConnell's jet from 6 angles. The Air Force loved documenting aces, but Hagerstrom's F-86 on that specific day, May 20th, 1953, apparently nobody pointed a camera. Or the image got misfiled. Or it existed and degraded in some archive box in Alabama. What we do have, the mission report, typed, Stark. FTR-BMR mission, target destroyed, engaged 2 times MiG-15, 1 time destroyed. Pilot Captain Hagerstrom. No commentary about the impossibility. No note that this broke assumed performance envelopes. Just the bureaucratic record that someone did something that shouldn't work and made it work anyway. Soviet advisors would revise their threat assessments within weeks. The documents show up in Russian archives with annotations. Bomb-armed Sabres were supposed to be ignored in favor of clean interceptors. After May 1953, the guidance changes. Treat all F-86 variants as equal threats, which is an extraordinary admission because it means someone at a Soviet operations desk had to explain upward why their pilots kept dying to jets that were theoretically inferior in that configuration. Hagerstrom would do this 7 more times. 8.5 total confirmed kills, half credit for 1 shared, while flying fighter bomber missions. Not as a pure air superiority pilot, as someone whose primary job was hauling ordnance to North Korean infrastructure and who happened to kill MiGs on the way home. There should be a photograph. The numbers are simple and they're brutal. An F-86 F Sabre weighs 10,900 pounds empty. Max takeoff weight hits 20,611 pounds. You hang 2 500-pound bombs under the wings, and you're adding 1,000 pounds of explosive plus another 200 or so for the racks and fins and shackles. Figure 1,200 pounds total that aren't fuel, aren't ammunition, aren't anything that helps you fight. The J-47 GE-27 engine puts out 5,910 pounds of thrust, static. At altitude, that number drops. Your thrust-to-weight ratio collapses from competitive to pathetic. The jet that could climb at 9,300 feet per minute clean now struggles past 6,000. Your turn rate drops. Your acceleration in a dive drops. Everything that keeps you alive in a dogfight gets worse. MiG-15s don't have this problem. The BIS variant weighs 8,115 pounds empty, carries a Klimov VK-1 engine, good for 5,950 pounds thrust. Almost identical power. 2,000 pounds less weight. They can climb faster, turn tighter in the vertical, zoom better. Soviet doctrine built the MiG-15 specifically to kill B-29 bombers, but it worked just fine against F-86s if the pilot knew what he was doing. Now add bombs to the American jet. You've just made it a target. Fighter-bomber doctrine in 1953 didn't assume you'd survive contact with interceptors while loaded. The missions were planned with fighter escorts, clean F-86s flying top cover, while the bomb haulers went low and fast to the target. You dropped ordnance. You got out. If MiGs bounced you before the drop, you pickled the bombs immediately and fought clean. Nobody expected you to hold on to the weight and win. The thrust-to-weight math doesn't lie. A loaded Sabre can't sustain a turning fight with a clean MiG at altitude. Can't. The energy bleed is too severe. You pull 4 Gs in a turn, and the jet decelerates like you threw an anchor. The MiG stays fast, comes around, gets guns on. Hagerstrom knew this. Every pilot knew this. 5th Air Force intelligence briefs spelled it out with charts. Soviet advisors knew it too, which is why their guidance to Chinese and North Korean pilots was straightforward. Ignore the bomb haulers unless you've got a free shot. Focus on the escorts first. What nobody seemed to factor, and I don't know why, maybe it's just one of those things doctrine misses, is what happens when the American pilot doesn't try to turn with the MiG, doesn't try to climb with it, uses the weight, speed in a dive compounds. The bombs that make you slow in level flight make you faster pointed down. You dive, you accelerate, you extend away before the MiG closes the angle. Then, you convert that speed back into altitude somewhere else, not where the MiG expects. You're flying a different fight, not his fight, yours. Soviet records from late 1952 into early 1953 show consistent success against fighter-bomber packages. Good kill ratios. Then something shifts in spring. The ratios reverse. Chinese pilots start reporting that bomb-armed Sabres won't commit to turning engagements, but keep killing MiGs anyway in slashing attacks they can't counter. Hagerstrom didn't invent this, but he perfected it while carrying ordnance meant for bridges and supply dumps. The jet that was supposed to die kept coming home with kill marks. The Yalu River runs brown most of the year. On the north side sit Antunga and Mukden, and a dozen other air bases the Americans weren't allowed to touch. On the south side, you could bomb whatever you wanted as long as it was already in North Korea. The MiGs lived on one side. Hagerstrom worked on the other. And the rules said he couldn't cross. This matters because it inverts the entire tactical situation. The MiG pilot could see an American formation coming from 40 miles out, scramble, climb to advantage, and dive on the F-86s whenever he wanted. If the fight went bad, he turned north and ran. Cross the Yalu and you're safe. UN pilots couldn't follow. Washington had made that decision at levels way above 5th Air Force, and the order was absolute. So, Hagerstrom's flying south of the river, with bombs attached, trying to hit a rail yard or a bridge or a fuel depot. Targets that didn't win the war but kept planners busy. And MiGs are orbiting overhead waiting to see if he's worth the fuel. If he looks vulnerable, they come down. If he dumps the bombs and runs, they let him go. It's a weird kind of voluntary engagement where the enemy gets to pick every fight. Most fighter-bomber pilots dealt with this by flying the mission fast and low, dropping ordnance the moment anything showed up on radar, then getting out. Smart. Survivable. You go home, you fly again tomorrow, nobody calls you a coward for refusing a fight you're rigged to lose. Hagerstrom did the opposite. He stayed north. After the drop, he'd orbit in MiG Alley, the corridor between the Yalu and Pyongyang, where most air combat happened, and wait for something to come down. With empty shackles still attached, still dragging, still bleeding speed in any maneuver. I cannot find the radio transcripts from these missions. They existed. 5th Air Force recorded everything. But the archives either don't have them, or they're misfiled under some designation I haven't cracked. What I'd give to hear the controller's voice when Hagerstrom called out MiGs engaged while still listed as a fighter-bomber package. The bait works because it looks easy. A Sabre with external stores, alone or nearly alone, sitting in the alley. That's supposed to be a free kill. Soviet advisors had told Chinese pilots exactly this. Go after the loaded jets. They can't fight back effectively. And they were right, except when they weren't. MiGs dove on him multiple times through spring 1953. At least 8 times they didn't pull out of the engagement. Gun camera confirms 6, witness statements add 2 more, and there's one claim that stays disputed because the MiG went down north of the river where nobody could verify the crash. The restraint must have been maddening. Watch a MiG limp home trailing smoke, and you can't follow. You can't confirm. You can't finish it. The river's right there. Cross and you face court-martial. So you turn south and file the report, and maybe it counts, maybe it doesn't. Hagerstrom never complained about this in any interview I could find, which is almost weirder than the kills themselves. Most Korea aces had opinions about the Yalu restriction. He just flew the missions and apparently didn't care that his playground had borders the enemy could ignore. May 20th, 1953. The mission brief said, CAS, close air support, troops in contact somewhere near Chorwon. 2 500-pounders, fused for airburst, target coordinates provided. Standard fighter-bomber tasking. Hagerstrom took off from Suwon around 9 a.m., I think, though the exact time isn't in the declassified sortie logs. The ground strike happened first. He found the target. I don't know if it was accurate fire or close enough, the bomb damage assessment doesn't specify, and pickled both weapons. Standard procedure says you egress immediately after release. Get low, get fast, get south. Don't loiter in an area where every gun crew just watched your attack run. He stayed high. The flight lead stayed with him, or maybe Hagerstrom was led. The records aren't clear on package composition that day. 2 F-86s, possibly 4. What's certain, MiGs came south from Antung. Probably saw the bomb strike, figured the Sabres were spent, came down for the cleanup. First MiG died at 1340 hours local. Gun camera shows the deflection shot. Hagerstrom's firing from maybe 20 degrees off the MiG-6. The tracers walk into the fuselage just aft of the wing root, and something lets go. Might be fuel, might be hydraulics. The MiG doesn't explode, it just starts hemorrhaging, and the pilot ejects maybe 8 seconds later. Chute deploys. He lands somewhere in North Korea, then no idea if he survived the ground. Modern multi-role jets do this constantly. An F-15E drops JDAMs on a convoy, then kills a fighter an hour later, and nobody thinks twice. That's the mission profile. But in 1953, these were separate jobs assigned to separate squadrons, flying separate jets. You were air superiority, or you were mud moving. Hagerstrom kept crossing the line, and 5th Air Force didn't know what to do with him administratively. He's racking up kills on fighter-bomber sorties, which means his victory count belongs to which unit exactly. The second engagement that day, same mission or different, I couldn't verify, he caught another MiG low. This one tried to run north, but Hagerstrom had altitude and converted it into overtake speed. Closed to 800 feet. Fired. The MiG pitched over and went in near Sinwiju. Unconfirmed. Witness statements exist, but no gun camera on this one. Maybe the film jammed. Maybe he didn't arm it after the first kill. 5th Air Force credited him with one destroyed that day. The other stayed probable, which is how you end up with half kills in the final tally. Shared credits, probables that got upgraded later, confirmed kills where the wreckage landed north of the river and couldn't be assessed. What bothers me is how little drama appears in the report. The language is identical to every other mission summary. Ordnance expended, enemy aircraft engaged, results observed. No note that this was abnormal. No comment that he'd just validated a capability the doctrine manuals said didn't exist. You read the debrief, and it sounds like he dropped bombs, killed a MiG, and landed in time for lunch. Which technically is what happened. But the aerodynamics and the tactical assumptions and the entire framework Soviet advisors had built for countering F-86 variants. All of that broke on May 20th, and the report reads like someone describing a mail run. The official tally sits at 8.5 confirmed air-to-air kills. The half comes from a shared credit. 2 Sabres fired on the same MiG, both hit, nobody could determine whose rounds did the killing, so 5th Air Force split it. Standard accounting for that situation. 8.5 puts Hagerstrom in the middle tier of Korean War aces. Not top 5, not close. McConnell got 16, Jabara got 15, Davis got 14. Hagerstrom's number looks almost modest until you remember every single one of those kills happened while he was hauling bombs or had just dropped them with the hardware still attached. But the records have problems. Soviet archives from 1953 are incomplete. Some got destroyed deliberately, some degraded. Some never made it out of unit-level files before those units disbanded. Cross-referencing American claims against Soviet loss records shows gaps everywhere. Dates don't match. Locations differ by 40 miles. Aircraft types get confused. One of Hagerstrom's claims involves a MiG-15 with landing gear trouble. This shows up in his debriefing from June 10th or June 12th. The dates smudged on the copy I found. He engaged a MiG that had its main gear extended, possibly stuck down, possibly battle damage from an earlier fight. The MiG couldn't maneuver properly. Hagerstrom shot it. It went down. 5th Air Force credited this as a kill. Soviet records from that period mention a MiG-15 biz that suffered hydraulic failure and crashed near Kasong. But the pilot's report, he survived, says the gear extended during evasive maneuvers, and he couldn't retract it before losing control. No mention of being fired upon. No mention of an F-86. Maybe the pilot didn't see Hagerstrom. Maybe the rounds hit after he'd already lost control, and he didn't connect the two events. Maybe it's a different MiG, and the dates just happened to align. I spent 3 days trying to reconcile this and came up empty. The claim stands in American records. Soviet records suggest the jet crashed due to mechanical failure. Both could be true. This is the problem with every Korean War air combat tally. The numbers look precise. 8.5 kills confirmed by gun camera and witness statements. But scratch the surface and it's messy. Pilots claimed kills they didn't get. Gun cameras jammed or ran out of film. Witnesses saw smoke and assumed a crash that maybe didn't happen. Soviet records undercounted losses for political reasons or overcounted them for budget reasons, or just filed them wrong. Hagerstrom's total could be 6, could be 10. 8.5 is the official number, and I'm using it because that's what 5th Air Force verified at the time with the evidence they had. But confidence in that precision is misplaced. The landing gear incident nags at me because it's the only claim in his record that involves a mechanical malfunction on the target aircraft. Every other kill reads clean. Engaged, fired, observed results, MiG destroyed. This one has an asterisk the documentation doesn't acknowledge. Did he shoot down a crippled jet? Is that cheaper than the other kills? I don't know. The rules said any enemy aircraft in the air was fair game regardless of condition. But it still reads different. He never talked about any of this publicly. Never disputed the tally, never argued for higher numbers, never complained about probables that didn't convert. Just flew the missions and let 5th Air Force count however they counted. The Soviet assessment dated June 1953, declassified in the 1990s, translations a little rough, uses the word nedoocenili, underestimated. The context is a tactical review sent from advisors in Manchuria back to Moscow, analyzing why Chinese and North Korean MiG losses had spiked in the previous 8 weeks. The document's dry. Soviet military writing always is. But you can read the frustration between the lines. They'd built guidance for engaging F-86 variants based on performance data that was accurate. MiG-15 climbs faster, turns tighter in the vertical, has cannons that hit harder than .50 caliber machine guns. Their math was right, their doctrine was sound, and their pilots kept dying. The section on fighter bomber packages is 3 paragraphs. I'll paraphrase because the translation's clunky. American F-86 aircraft carrying external ordnance were assessed as non-priority targets due to degraded performance characteristics. Engagement was recommended only when tactical situation allowed low-risk intercepts. This guidance resulted in multiple losses when ordnance-equipped aircraft engaged successfully in air combat rather than evading as predicted. That's the whole thing. Soviet advisors had assumed, correctly, based on physics, that a bomb-loaded Sabre couldn't win a dogfight. So they told their pilots, focus on the clean escorts, ignore the mud movers unless you get a free shot. The Americans responded by having the mud movers kill you anyway. There's a list. Not Hagerstrom by name, Soviet intelligence hadn't identified individual American pilots at that level, but a breakdown of engagement outcomes from April through June 1953, where F-86 aircraft confirmed or suspected to be carrying external stores achieved air-to-air kills, the numbers higher than 8. Hagerstrom wasn't the only one doing this. He was just the best at it. The revision comes in July. New guidance distributed to all MiG units operating in the Yalu corridor. Treat all F-86 variants as equally threatening regardless of observed external configuration. Do not assume ordnance-equipped aircraft will disengage. Maintain energy advantage and use vertical tactics to exploit their reduced climb performance. It's a complete reversal, and it's an admission that American pilots had found a way to fight that Soviet doctrine hadn't accounted for. They couldn't outturn the MiGs while loaded, so they didn't try. They used speed and aggression and probably a lot of individual initiative that didn't appear in any American doctrine manual either. One note in the margins, handwritten, couldn't decipher whose, says something like, propose restricting engagement parameters further. Meaning, maybe stop fighting the bomb haulers entirely. Just let them hit their targets and go home. Which would have been a win for Hagerstrom's approach. You make yourself enough of a threat that the enemy decides you're not worth engaging. Chinese pilot accounts from this period, the ones that got translated and archived, mention F-86s that should not have fought, but did. There's confusion in the reports, frustration. The performance advantage that was supposed to exist kept not mattering in actual combat. Some of that's pilot skill. Some of that's tactical surprise. Some of that's Americans doing things the other side's doctrine said were stupid and making them work anyway. The MiG-15 remained a better interceptor than the F-86 on paper through the end of the war. Soviet advisors never retracted that assessment. They just stopped assuming American pilots would behave rationally according to the paper. June 1953, 13 days, 4 confirmed kills. Hagerstrom's flying fighter bomber sorties the entire time. Bridges, supply routes, troop concentrations, whatever the tasking order says. And between drops, he's killing MiGs at a rate that would be impressive for a pure air superiority pilot. June 4th, MiG-15 engaged near Sinanju. Gun camera shows the hit, right engine area. Fire starts immediately. Pilot ejects, confirmed. June 10th, 2 MiGs, or possibly the landing gear incident I mentioned earlier, plus 1 clean kill. The records conflict. 1 destroyed confirmed, 1 probable that might have gotten upgraded later or might still sit in the probable column, depending on which archive you trust. June 17th, MiG-15 bis at high altitude. This one tried to zoom away. Hagerstrom followed into the climb, which should have been suicide with external stores still attached, and got guns on target around 38,000 feet. The MiG snap-rolled and went down. Whether the pilot got out, I don't know. No mention in the debrief. Somewhere in this span, dates unclear, might be June 8th, there's an incident that didn't make it into the official histories. Hagerstrom almost shot down an F-86. Friendly fire. Near miss. The other Sabre crossed his line of fire during an engagement with MiGs. Hagerstrom had already committed to the trigger. Rounds went close enough that the other pilot reported hits or near hits over radio. No damage. Nobody died. 5th Air Force investigated, determined it was a maneuvering error by the other pilot who cut across without clearing the formation, and dropped it. The report's buried in unit files, not in Hagerstrom's victory credits or his personnel jacket. I found it because I was looking for something else, and the date matched. This is the thing nobody talks about with high-tempo air combat. You're flying formations of 4 or 6 aircraft, all moving at 500 miles per hour, all armed, all firing in 3-dimensional space where the geometry changes every second. The miracle isn't that fratricide almost happened. The miracle is that it didn't happen constantly. June ends with the armistice talks gaining traction. Everyone knows the war's finishing. The mission tempo actually increases because both sides want last-minute tactical wins before the ceasefire locks in. More sorties, more targets. More MiGs coming south to contest the fighter-bomber packages. Hagerstrom flies through all of it. I tried to count his total June sorties, and the records are incomplete. Some mission logs didn't survive. Some got consolidated into weekly summaries that don't break down individual pilots. but it's somewhere north of 40 flights in 30 days. Maybe 50. He's in the air almost every day the weather allows. 4 kills in 13 days doesn't sound remarkable until you remember most aces took years to build that total. Hagerstrom did it in 2 weeks while his primary job was dropping bombs on infrastructure. The air-to-air work was supposed to be incidental. Self-defense. It turned into a killing spree. Soviet advisors revised their guidance again in late June. I don't have that document. But Chinese pilot reports from July show they'd stopped engaging bomb-loaded F-86s entirely unless they had significant numerical advantage. 3-1 or better, which means Hagerstrom and pilots like him had successfully made themselves too dangerous to fight under anything but perfect conditions. The armistice hits July 27th. All combat operations cease. Hagerstrom's war ends at 8.5 confirmed kills, all scored while flying fighter-bomber missions, none of which should have worked. James Hagerstrom gave almost no interviews after Korea. I found 2. One's a brief newspaper piece from 1954, maybe 400 words, where he talks about transitioning to Jet Training Command and says nothing about MiG kills. The other's a military journal article from 1959 focused on fighter-bomber tactics. Technical, dry, could have been written by anyone. His name's on it, but the voice is generic Air Force. Compare this to his contemporaries. Jabara did speaking tours. McConnell appeared in newsreels. Davis wrote articles, gave interviews, showed up at air shows. The Air Force loved parading its aces, public relations gold, heroes who'd beaten the communists in air-to-air combat, perfect for Cold War propaganda. Hagerstrom disappeared. Not literally. He stayed in the Air Force, made lieutenant colonel, commanded training squadrons, retired in 1966. But publicly, he vanished. No memoir, no documentary appearances. His name shows up in Korean War aviation books as a line item. Hagerstrom, James P., 8.5 victories, fighter-bomber pilot. Then nothing. I don't know why. Some aces hated the attention and preferred privacy. Some had personality conflicts with Air Force PR offices. Some just didn't think their war stories mattered enough to retell. Hagerstrom left no record explaining his silence. His personnel file, the parts that got declassified, shows steady performance reviews, normal career progression, nothing remarkable after 1953. He trained pilots, he evaluated tactics, he did staff work. The evaluations mention Korea once. Combat experienced officer with proven air-to-air capability. That's it. You'd never know from reading his fitness reports that he'd done something most doctrine manuals said was impossible. There's no Hagerstrom Foundation, no scholarship in his name, no F-86 painted in his colors sitting in a museum. The Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson has a Korea exhibit, I've been, and his name appears on a list of aces mounted on the wall. Small print, alphabetical order, same size as everyone else. Maybe he didn't want the attention. Maybe the kills mattered less to him than they did to the people counting them. Maybe he figured he'd done his job, and that was enough. The last document I found with his name is from 1987. Someone at Air University was compiling oral histories of Korean warfighter pilots and sent Hagerstrom a request for an interview. He declined. Politely. The letter's in the archive. Thank you for your interest, but I have nothing to add to the existing record. Existing record, which is mission reports, gun camera footage, and victory credits filed by other people. His own voice, what he thought, what he felt, why he kept engaging MiGs while loaded with bombs when every tactical manual said to run. None of that exists. We have the outcomes. We don't have the reasoning. He died in 1994. Obituary ran in the Air Force Times. Standard format. Name, rank, service dates, survived by wife and children. One sentence mentions Korea. No mention of the 8.5 kills. No mention that he'd rewritten assumptions about what fighter bombers could do in air combat. Soviet advisors wrote reports analyzing his tactics. Chinese pilots filed debriefs about the American jet that wouldn't behave correctly. 5th Air Force credited him with kills that shifted doctrine. And Hagerstrom himself left almost nothing behind except the numbers. 8.5 confirmed victories. all scored while carrying bombs or the hardware that carried them, all achieved against an aircraft that was faster and more maneuverable in that configuration. The records prove it happened. Hagerstrom never explained how,